Celebration, Florida, aka the town that Disney built, caters to a very specific lifestyle. This is something that I said the other day when we were here in Celebration talking about the newly renovated hotel just down the way in Celebration Town Center. And I got a comment from one of you asking if I could elaborate on that little pause there, you know, that Celebration caters to a specific kind of lifestyle. And I'm happy to do just that because, you know, I know there are a lot of people who are considering calling Celebration home. As I said the other day, I was one of those people. And as someone who is here in Celebration all the time, I kind of have a better sense of the place now than I did before. And so I want to share some thoughts with you, kind of giving you a better idea of what to expect and some of the things that I think you need to know if this is a place that you're considering. So there are three main points that I want to discuss with you today, okay? In no particular order, just three things that I think you need to know if you're considering Celebration as a place to call home. But before we get into that, I want to make myself perfectly clear. I'm not going to BS you in today's discussion, okay? Which is something that honestly a lot of people sometimes do when they talk about places like Celebration, places like Walt Disney World. They're places that mean a lot to a lot of people, but they're also places that people kind of, you know, they're on the top of some people's lists. So no one wants to hurt any feelings. So there's a lot of sugarcoating, a lot of rose-colored glasses. I'm not here for that. I'm here to give you the information that you need to make the best decision for you and your family. So that's what we're going to do today. But first, we're actually going to move because they're about to start some yard work where we're hanging out. So let's go find a place that'll be a little bit more quiet. Okay. I think this is a much better place to have this conversation. So, like I said, three different things that I want to talk to you about, no particular order, no BS. Also, before we fully jump in, it's important to keep in mind as we're hanging out having this conversation today that everyone's going to have a different perspective on things, especially when it comes to finding a place to call home. Everyone has different wants and needs, and everyone has a different level of tolerance for certain types of things. So it's really important, especially with some of the things that we're going to discuss today, to understand that for some of you, this might be like small potatoes, not a big deal. For other people, this could have this place that they're considering as a place to move and call home turning into a nightmare really, really quickly. We're all from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences, and that plays into how we formulate what our wants and needs are. So please keep that in mind as we kind of go through all of this and understand that, hey, just because it's not a big deal to you doesn't mean it's not a big deal to anybody, or that it shouldn't be a big deal, because some of these things are. It's just a matter of fact. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's jump in. So the first thing I think is really important to keep in mind if you're considering Celebration is that it does have that small town feel, which again is going to be some people's cup of tea. It's not for everybody though. And it's honestly really kind of interesting that Celebration has this type of small town feel because it really isn't a small town. It's a pretty big place and it's not situated out of the way like a lot of small towns are. You're like right in a city type environment here in Celebration, Florida. So that makes it unique, definitely in a good way if you want that like small town vibe, but also you don't want to be like out in the middle of nowhere. But it also has some, you know, downsides as well. There's a little bit of pretentious feel here in Celebration, especially amongst certain people. There are definitely people here in Celebration that wear the status of living here on their sleeve like a badge of honor. And that can create a type of environment that, again, isn't right for everybody, like an insider, outsider type of thing. Now, when it comes to being in that type of place, even if that's not something that would bother you at all, which again is fine, there are a lot of things that you're still gonna have to encounter and you need to be aware of them. So for example, it's very rule heavy here, not just with HOA fees and all of that if you're considering buying property here in Celebration, but there are also some rules that you might not necessarily be aware of that are gonna limit your access to things like community spaces based on where you choose to live. So for example, let's say you're considering moving to the newly developed area of Celebration Island Village. If you're living in that part of town, you buy into that part of town. There are certain community spaces that you won't have access to that you would have had access to if you purchased into a different part of Celebration. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that today, but I do mention that because it's important to keep in mind that like status and who can do what in this town, in this community, is something you really want to be aware of and you want to look into, especially before you settle in on moving to a very particular part of town. Now, the next thing on my list is flexibility. If you're thinking about living in Celebration, you need to be flexible, specifically when it comes to time. So for example, people who might be retired or they're remote workers. You're not on a set schedule. You can come and go when Celebration allows you to comfortably come and go. And I say this because Celebration, especially certain areas of Celebration, either have so much going on and they're not suited for it, or they're just not done well at the moment. You know, they're in progress. Let me explain though. So first and foremost, we have Celebration Town Center, that like main heart of Celebration. This is where a lot of events happen throughout the year. One of the most notable events happens during the holidays. It's called Now Snowing, and it draws in a lot of people, not only from around Celebration, but also from the surrounding area. But Celebration is not built to handle this number of people. And unfortunately, at least in this past holiday season, the town did not manage it well, which quite frankly made being in or around Celebration, trying to move through Celebration, an absolute nightmare. Which is one thing if you are just passing through. There are ways to get around the town center area, but if you happen to live in this area, there's no escaping it. There are days where it very well may take you 45 minutes to leave your street, which is crazy, but it's part of living here in this particular area, and it's something that you need to be aware of and something that you need to understand, especially if you're not retired, you're not a remote worker, you don't have that flexibility. Now, like I said, this isn't specific to only one area. It also applies to the newly developed area of Celebration known as Island Village. Now, this section of town is currently being developed. There's multiple phases. I don't know off the top of my head what phase they're in, and eventually, when it's completed, things will probably be a little bit different than they are today. But I'm talking about the here and now, and for the foreseeable future, this new area, it's one way in, one way out. And that way in and out, it's very congested, not just because of all the people who live in the area, but there's also a school right there, on top of a grocery store and a ton of other stuff too. Which means that multiple times a day, every day, it is very congested right there. And that can make it hard to move. And look, the reality of the situation is that puts a lot of limitations on how and when you can come and go from your neighborhood, which is something you need to be aware of. Now, as a bit of a side note about time and flexibility, it is important to note that whether you're thinking about moving to Celebration or somewhere in the surrounding area nearby Walt Disney World, over by Universal, or honestly any vacation destination here in Florida or around the world, there is going to be a certain element of adjustment that you're going to have to make. Like it's going to happen. It's part of living in a touristy place, in a vacation destination. And you'll get the hang of it. You'll figure it out as you go, but you will have to make some sort of adjustment. That's part of living in this type of environment. So maybe you don't go to your closest Walmart because it's a tourist hotspot and you drive a little bit out of the way for a more convenient shopping experience. Or you never do your groceries on a Monday because that's when the tourists come in and the grocery store shelves are just always cleared out. Like, you'll figure that out, and it'll be different depending on a number of preferences, right? Or your level of tolerance for whatever type of thing, just like I mentioned earlier. So I do think that it's important to realize that regardless, you're going to have to make some level of adjustment. But as a person who's lived in vacation destinations, really popular vacation destinations, for like a majority of my adult life, I've never seen a place that is as difficult to get out of, as congested, for example, as Celebration is, on such a level as it is here in Celebration, like places where you might not be able to get out of your street or off of your street, for example, so that's why I mention it. again, just choose wisely, do your research, come down here if you can and just kind of experience the area that you're thinking about living in. Drive back and forth during different times of the day just to get a sense of what that looks like, which, is something you should probably do regardless. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. So, just be aware that adjustments are going to have to be made, but if you are going to live in certain very heavily congested areas of Celebration, it might be a bigger adjustment than you think or, you're ready for. All right, my third point, Celebration is not as nice as you probably want it to be. Did I rub some of you the wrong way? I feel like I may have, but facts are facts. Celebration is a picture-perfect place to live. It's lovely. There's no getting around that. Driving down some of the streets, you feel like you're in a Walt Disney World resort, quite frankly, which makes sense because Disney built this town. And while they no longer own the town, a lot of that Disney charm, that picture-perfect Main Street USA-esque type thing, still exists here in Celebration. But despite that, despite the Bentleys that you'll see parked in driveways or the massive houses with crazy water slides out back, there are some realities of living in Celebration, or just some realities of Celebration in general, that might be too much for some. Remember how earlier I said this is a city type environment? It is. And Celebration, though it feels like you're in the Disney bubble, isn't really a bubble at all. There are no gated communities here in Celebration. There's nothing stopping anyone from passing through. It's just a place, like anywhere else. And there are good and bad things about this place. Like I said, there are some areas of Celebration that are absolutely gorgeous, but there are also panhandlers in the Publix parking lot and homeless people sleeping on benches at the bus stop. And yeah, you're a crosswalk away from a not so great part of town, which, like I mentioned earlier, isn't a problem for everybody. Like if you're the type of person who maybe you're not from a great neighborhood or a great part of the country, and you hear me say that there's like people panhandling in the parking lot, you're thinking, oh, well, that's no big deal. I get it, right? Like I'm from that type of place that it doesn't really bother me all that much, but I also know that there are a lot of you who are expecting Disney when you move to Celebration. And if that's what you're expecting, this might really push you over the edge. And the truth is, just like Disney, there are a lot of people here in Celebration who they know it's there, but they pretend that it's not. And they think that if they don't acknowledge it, if they don't talk about it, that means it's not true. Which, hey, if that works for you, that's great. You do you, as I've said from the very beginning, but I do think that it's important to have honest conversations about this so, again, you can be prepared if you're thinking about moving here, because this is not going to be for everybody. And especially if you're talking about buying a really expensive home, you might have some limitations or tolerances that don't match up with someone who is, turning a blind eye. Now, in our previous discussion, I said that we were considering Celebration, and I don't remember if I mentioned that we didn't move here, but we didn't. And there were two reasons for that. I'll share them with you now. The first is that it just wasn't what we were willing to pay for. Now, Celebration, as a little brief aside, I know I'm adding all these little tidbits in, but you don't have to be like super rich to live in Celebration. They have accommodations and homes for all different price ranges, so they've got apartments in Celebration, they've got like multi-million-dollar homes in Celebration. Regardless of that, we saw that there were other places nearby that met our needs, were a better price, and just appealed to us more than Celebration did, so we went with somewhere else. But another thing that helped make our decision was the small town feel. Now again, this was something that just didn't do it for us, but other people like it. In fact, we know people who live in Celebration. They absolutely love Celebration for that small town vibe. But we'd already spent a good amount of time living in a small town environment very similar to Celebration, and it wasn't for us. So when we got here, spent some time in the local area and noticed that that was the vibe, we were like, no thank you. And so that also kind of played into our decision as well, but not as much as the fact that there were just other places that we thought would be better for our pocketbook, you know, like other places that appealed to us for more reasons and also didn't cost us what Celebration would have. But you know, that was just what turned out to be the best decision for us and why we went the route that we did. And I'm glad that we did, because the more time I spend in Celebration, the more I realize that I really don't care for Celebration. I don't care for living in Celebration, all for little reasons that over the years I've decided I haven't liked about living in certain places. And you put that all together, you realize what place is for you versus what place isn't, and this is just not a place for us. All right, so we talked about the 3 things I think you need to know if you're considering Celebration. Hopefully that can help you decide whether or not this is a place that is right for you, or at least get some gears turning. We also talked about why we didn't move to Celebration. But there's one more thing that I just want to toss in here before we wrap up today's discussion, and that is, if you're considering moving to Celebration, like this is a serious thing for you, I highly recommend not only vacationing down here and spending some time in Celebration, like renting a car, kind of exploring the area, exploring the surrounding area, but also once you're settled on Celebration, before you fully invest in like buying a house or buying a condo, consider renting for a year. Really try this place on for size and decide if this type of place is the place for you. And I'm not just talking about Celebration specifically, right? Like, because it's going to have its ups and downs, its good things and bad things, but moving to a vacation destination, especially if you've never lived in a vacation destination before or a popular vacation destination, it's a huge shift in the way you live your life. So I do recommend kind of moving down here, trying it on for size, seeing if this type of shift is something that you're willing to do before you invest in like buying property. If that's something that's on your list of things to do. I know that that's not for everybody, but yeah. So there you have it. Those are the things I think that you need to know. I hope that this answered your question for the person who wanted to hear a little bit more about why I said that Celebration caters to a specific lifestyle. Again, it's going to be right for some people. It's not going to be right for others, but I hope that this helps you figure out what's right for you. But for now, thanks so much for hanging out, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Until then, bye.